3 days before my son's wedding, his bride called me in a trembling voice. "Helen, did you give Matthew permission to take $86,000 from your retirement account?"
Still happening?
My fingers tightened around the phone.
$86,000
I had discovered the missing money weeks earlier, but Matthew swore he had used it to save their wedding
Mom,
after Rachel's father refused to
I only
pay.
used it to save my wedding.
"Why are you asking me this?"
He paid
I
every
whispered.
bill, Mrs. Gable.
Rachel went silent
Everything.
before saying, "Because my father already paid every wedding bill." "Please don't tell Matthew I called. I think he's been lying to both of us." Before I continue, please like and subscribe if you believe a mother's love should never be exploited. Tell me in the comments what you would have done and where you're listening from and what time it is there. My name is Helen Wilson, and until the week of my son's wedding, I believed the greatest financial danger facing a woman my age was an unexpected hospital bill. I was 68 years old and had spent most of my life in Columbus, Ohio. For 34 years, I worked as a secretary at Lincoln Elementary School. I knew every teacher's schedule, every child who tried to pretend a stomachache before a math test, and every parent who needed a little kindness before hearing difficult news. The job never made me wealthy, but it gave me a life I was proud of. My husband, Thomas, worked as an electrical maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant. He left home before sunrise and often returned with grease beneath his fingernails. We were married for 42 years, and during that time, we learned how to make every dollar matter. We packed lunches instead of eating out. We took road trips instead of expensive vacations. We repaired appliances before replacing them. Thomas kept the same lawnmower for 23 years, insisting it only needed encouragement and a new belt. The money in my savings account represented all those small choices. It was not simply a number on a screen. It was the kitchen renovation. We postponed the coats I wore for one more winter, and the overtime shifts Thomas accepted when Matthew needed braces. Most importantly, it was meant to protect me if I became sick or could no longer live independently. Before Thomas died, he made me promise never to feel guilty about keeping that money. "We raised our son," he told me one evening. "We helped him start his life. What remains is there to protect yours." Thomas died from a sudden heart attack 3 years before Matthew's wedding. One morning, he was complaining that I had made his coffee too weak. By that evening, I was sitting beneath the harsh lights of a hospital waiting room, holding his wedding ring in my palm. Grief changed the shape of my life. The house became too quiet. I continued setting 2 coffee cups on the counter for weeks. I would hear the furnace turn on and briefly imagine Thomas moving around in the basement. Every ordinary object seemed to remember him: the worn armchair, the tools in the garage, even the grocery list attached to the refrigerator. During that first year, Matthew called almost every day. He was my only child, and his attention felt like a rope thrown to someone struggling in deep water. He brought groceries, changed light bulbs, and checked the locks. When I struggled with the online banking system Thomas had always managed, Matthew patiently showed me where to click. "You don't need to worry about these things anymore, Mom," he often said. "I'm here." At the time, those words comforted me. Matthew was 39 and worked in regional sales for an office equipment company. He had always been charming. As a child, he could talk his way out of almost any punishment. As an adult, that same charm made people believe he was more successful than he truly was. He wore expensive suits, leased a luxury car, and spoke constantly about promotions that were supposedly just around the corner. Whenever I asked if he was saving money, he smiled and told me not to worry. Then, 18 months after Thomas died, I needed hip surgery. The operation was successful, but the recovery was slow. For several weeks, I needed help shopping, driving, and managing bills. Matthew suggested that I give him temporary financial authority so he could pay medical expenses if I was unable to access my accounts. The idea came from him, but it did not seem unreasonable. We met at my dining table with a short authorization form. It allowed Matthew to handle hospital bills, insurance payments, and necessary household expenses during my recovery. I read each page carefully. I even called the bank to confirm that the authority was limited and could be revoked whenever I chose. Matthew acted almost offended by my caution. "Mom, I'm not trying to take over your life," he said. "I'm just trying to help." I apologized for appearing suspicious. That apology would later haunt me. After I signed the form, Matthew laid each page flat on the table and photographed it with his phone. He said he needed copies in case the bank misplaced anything. Then he placed the originals inside a blue folder and returned them to me. I did not question why he needed photographs of every page. I did not wonder why he held his phone so carefully above my signature. By the time I recovered, Matthew had resumed his usual routine. I assumed the temporary authorization no longer mattered. He continued helping me with technology, but I paid my own bills and managed my accounts. Nothing appeared unusual. Then, he introduced me to Rachel Parker. Rachel was 36, with calm, gray eyes and a quiet confidence I immediately admired. She worked in the compliance department of a local credit union where she reviewed transactions and helped ensure financial regulations were followed. The first time we met, she brought me a small pot of lavender rather than an expensive bouquet. "Cut flowers are beautiful," she said, "but I thought you might prefer something that could keep growing." That simple gesture touched me. Rachel never treated me as an obligation. She called to ask how I was feeling, invited me to lunch, and listened when I spoke about Thomas. Once, after noticing his photograph on the mantel, she asked what kind of music he had loved. The next time she visited, she brought me a record by his favorite jazz musician. When Matthew announced their engagement, I cried with happiness. I thought Rachel might become the daughter I had never had. More than that, I believed she brought out the best in Matthew. He seemed focused, affectionate, and eager to build a stable future. But once wedding planning began, something in him changed. Rachel wanted a warm, elegant ceremony with close family and friends. Matthew wanted an event people would discuss for years. He insisted on a historic downtown venue, imported flowers, a live band, premium liquor, and luxury transportation for the wedding party. It's one day Rachel told him during dinner at my house, "We shouldn't begin our marriage trying to impress people." Matthew laughed, but I saw irritation cross his face. "You only get married once," he replied. "I'm not going to make it look cheap." After that, he began mentioning money whenever we were alone. At first, the comments sounded like jokes. "You and Dad saved enough to finance a royal wedding." Another time, he looked around my house and said, "You have more money tied up in this place than you'll ever need." I reminded him that my savings had to support me for the rest of my life. Matthew smiled and squeezed my shoulder. "Of course, Mom. I'm only saying you should enjoy seeing some of it put to good use." A week later, he asked how much remained in the savings account Thomas and I had built together. When I refused to give him an exact number, his expression hardened for a fraction of a second. Then the charm returned. "Forget I asked," he said. "I just worry about you." I wanted to believe him. He was my son, the little boy whose fever I had watched through countless nights, the teenager whose college applications I had helped complete, and the grieving man who held my hand at his father's funeral. Mothers do not easily accept that the child they protected might one day become the person they need protection from. So I ignored the discomfort. I told myself Matthew was under pressure. I blamed the wedding, his demanding job, and his fear of disappointing Rachel. I did not connect his questions about my savings to the photographs he had taken after my surgery. Not until much later. That night, after Rachel's phone call, I opened the blue folder containing the original authorization. I placed it on the same dining table where Matthew and I had sat after my operation. As I studied my signature, a forgotten image returned with painful clarity. Matthew, standing above the documents, carefully photographing every page, his face unusually serious. For the first time, I wondered whether my son had been planning to use my trust long before a single wedding invitation was mailed. 6 weeks before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my laptop to pay the property tax installment on my house. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and a local news anchor was talking about traffic on Interstate 70. I remember those details because they seemed almost insulting afterward. My life was about to split open, yet the rest of the world continued as if nothing had happened. I signed into my bank account and clicked on the savings tab. For several seconds, I thought the website had made a mistake. The balance showed $7,418.26. I stared at the number, waiting for my eyes to adjust. There should have been more than $93,000 in that account. It contained the money Thomas and I had protected for decades, along with a small life insurance payment I had received after his death. I refreshed the page. The balance did not change. My hands began to shake as I opened the transaction history. 3 large transfers had been made during the previous 10 days. The first was for $31,000. The second was for $27,000. The third was for $28,000. $86,000 was gone. Each transaction carried a vague description. One referred to a venue payment, another said private event services. The third listed a company called Reed Premier Events. I read the entries again and again, hoping I had misunderstood them. Perhaps they were pending transactions. Perhaps the bank had attached someone else's activity to my account. Perhaps there was some explanation that would allow my heart to stop pounding. I called the bank. After several security questions, the customer service representative told me the transfers had been authorized by someone listed as having financial access to my account, who I asked, though I already knew. Matthew Wilson. The room seemed to tilt. I ended the call without reporting fraud because panic had taken control of my judgment. Matthew was my son. Before I accused him of stealing from me, I needed to hear his explanation. I called him and asked him to come over immediately. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "I need to speak to you in person." There was a pause. "I'm in the middle of work. Then tell your supervisor there is a family emergency." My voice must have frightened him because he arrived less than 40 minutes later. He entered through the back door without knocking, wearing a navy suit, and carrying his car keys in one hand. "What happened?" he asked. I had printed the transaction history and placed it on the table. I pointed to the chair across from me. "Sit down." Matthew looked at the papers. His expression changed so quickly that I nearly missed it. First there was alarm, then calculation. Finally, he arranged his face into something resembling concern. "I was going to explain," he said. Those 5 words told me the transfers were not a banking error. "You took $86,000 from my savings. I didn't take it for myself. You moved money without asking me. Mom, please let me explain." I waited. Matthew loosened his tie and leaned forward, lowering his voice as if the walls might overhear us. The wedding was about to collapse. Robert pulled his support at the last minute. The venue needed payment the caterer threatened to cancel, and we were going to lose every deposit. I knew Rachel's father had offered to help with the wedding, but I had never asked how much. Robert was financially comfortable, yet he did not seem like someone who believed money should be wasted. Why would Robert suddenly refuse to pay? Because Rachel and he had an argument about the guest list. He decided to teach her a lesson. That did not sound like the considerate man I had met, but Matthew spoke with such certainty that doubt entered my mind. "Rachel doesn't know how serious it is," he continued. "I told her I would handle everything. With my money, I had no other choice. You could have asked me. If I had asked, you would have panicked exactly like this." His answer struck me harder than if he had shouted. He had not forgotten to ask permission. He had deliberately decided I did not deserve the chance to refuse. I pushed the statements toward him. You will return every dollar. I will. My company is finalizing a major regional contract. When it closes, I'll receive a bonus large enough to repay most of it. Most of it? All of it, eventually. I only need time. I asked to see the wedding invoices. Matthew said they were stored at his apartment. When I asked for the venue manager's phone number, irritation flickered across his face. Why are you treating me like a criminal? Because you removed my savings without telling me. I saved my wedding mom. I saved Rachel from being humiliated in front of everyone she knows. He stood and began pacing the kitchen. His voice became emotional as he described Rachel crying over canceled flowers and family members whispering that he could not provide for her. I could not tell whether any of it had actually happened, but he knew exactly which fears would affect me. Then he used Thomas. Dad would have helped me, he said. The words left me breathless. Do not speak for your father. He believed family came first. Your father also believed you asked before taking something that didn't belong to you. Matthew stopped pacing. For a moment, the charm disappeared entirely. That money will be mine one day anyway. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear the refrigerator humming. What did you say? His expression softened immediately. I said it badly. I'm under enormous pressure. You think my savings already belong to you? No. Of course not. He sat beside me and reached for my hand. I pulled it away. Matthew lowered his head. I'm sorry. I know I should have asked, but if Rachel discovers I couldn't pay, she may cancel the wedding. Please don't call her. Let me fix this. He reminded me of all the ways he had helped after Thomas died, driving me to appointments, bringing groceries, and managing repairs. Each example sounded less like love and more like an invoice he had been waiting to collect. If you tell Rachel now, he said, you'll destroy the happiest moment of my life. There it was, the burden placed carefully into my hands. If I spoke, I would become the mother who ruined her son's wedding. If I remained silent, I would have to live with what he had done. I looked down at the statements and forced my voice to remain calm. I need time to think. Matthew studied my face. Then he exhaled, apparently satisfied that fear and guilt had worked. Thank you. I promise you'll understand once everything settles down. He kissed my forehead before leaving. The moment his car disappeared, I locked the door and returned to the computer. I took screenshots of every transaction, printed another set of statements, and wrote down everything Matthew had said while the conversation was fresh in my mind. I was hurt, but I was not helpless. Before closing the account page, I checked the notification settings. The bank had always sent security alerts to my phone and email. Yet I had received nothing about the 3 transfers. My phone number had been replaced with one I did not recognize. My email address had also been changed. I called the unfamiliar number from my landline. From the hallway, I heard a faint electronic buzzing. Matthew had left an old phone charger in the guest room after my surgery. Beside it sat a small prepaid phone I had never seen before. Its screen lit up with my incoming call. That was where my bank warnings had been going. Matthew had not simply used access I once gave him. He had made certain I would not discover what he was doing until the money was gone. 3 days before the wedding, when Rachel called and asked whether I had authorized Matthew to take $86,000, I was no longer completely unprepared. For 6 weeks, I had carried the knowledge of the missing money alone. I had preserved the transaction records, hidden the prepaid phone, and written down every explanation Matthew had given me. What I did not have was proof that his story about Robert withdrawing financial support was false. Rachel's call gave me that proof. Tell me exactly what you found, I said. She took a shaky breath. Yesterday I borrowed Matthew's car because mine was being serviced. When I opened the glove compartment, a folded bank receipt fell out with the registration papers. Rachel explained that the receipt showed a $28,000 transfer from my savings account to a company called Reed Premier Events. My full name and the final digits of my account number were printed near the top. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, she continued. Matthew told me you gave us a wedding gift, but he said it was only a few $1,000s. He never asked me for any gift. The sentence left my mouth more quietly than I intended. Rachel fell silent. What do you mean? He transferred $86,000 without my permission. I heard her inhale sharply. He told me you offered to help because you wanted us to begin our marriage without debt. He told me your father had refused to pay and the wedding was about to be canceled. My father never refused. The certainty in her voice erased the last excuse I had tried to preserve for my son. Rachel explained that Robert had offered to cover the major wedding expenses from the beginning. He had paid each vendor directly rather than giving Matthew or Rachel a lump sum. Robert believed that method would keep the budget organized and prevent misunderstandings. The venue had been paid in full 2 months earlier. The caterer had received its final payment. The florist, photographer, cake designer, and band had all confirmed their deposits. Even the hotel rooms reserved for elderly relatives had already been covered. Matthew told me he was paying for the smaller details himself, Rachel said. Transportation gifts for the wedding party, things like that, but nothing close to $86,000. I pressed my free hand against my chest. The room suddenly felt too warm. Did you ask Matthew about the receipt? No. Something stopped me. What? The way he's been behaving. Rachel told me that Matthew had become secretive whenever she asked about the budget. He insisted that she concentrate on enjoying the wedding instead of worrying about invoices. When she requested a complete expense list, he accused her of not trusting him. Then 2 weeks earlier, he asked her to sign a form acknowledging that both families had voluntarily contributed to the wedding. She had refused because the wording was vague. The detail chilled me. Matthew had not only been trying to protect himself from me, he had been preparing explanations for Rachel as well. After I found the receipt, I started making calls, she said. Rachel had contacted the venue first. The coordinator confirmed that Robert's payments covered the ballroom staff furniture and security deposit. No money from me had ever reached the venue. The caterer gave the same answer. So did the florist and photographer. No one has heard of Reed Premier Events, Rachel said. That company isn't listed in any contract. I looked at the printed statement lying beside my laptop. For weeks, the name had seemed like a locked door. Now Rachel was telling me it did not belong anywhere in the legitimate wedding plans. What about the $31,000 transfer, she asked. The description says venue services. That can't be right. Dad paid the venue directly, and the $27,000 private event expenses. Yes. Rachel's voice tightened. We don't have $27,000 in private expenses. Outside my kitchen window, a delivery truck rolled slowly down the street. I watched it pass because I needed something ordinary to hold on to. My son sat at this table, I said, and told me your father abandoned you both over an argument about the guest list. My father and I never had that argument. He said you would cancel the wedding if you discovered Matthew couldn't pay. I never expected Matthew to pay for everything. We agreed on a budget together, or at least I thought we did. The shame in her voice sounded painfully familiar. Matthew had designed his lies so each of us would feel responsible for protecting him. He used my fear of losing my son and Rachel's fear of humiliating the man she loved. He had kept us separated by convincing each of us that speaking honestly would hurt the other. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. I should have paid closer attention. No. He lied to you, just as he lied to me. But I work in financial compliance. I'm supposed to recognize suspicious behavior. You trusted the man you were going to marry. That isn't a professional failure. For the first time since discovering the missing money, I did not feel entirely alone. I told Rachel about the temporary authorization I had signed after my surgery. I explained that Matthew had photographed every page and later changed the contact information on my bank account. I also told her about the prepaid phone I had found in my guest room. "He redirected your alerts?" she asked. "Yes. That means this was planned." Hearing her say it made the truth harder to avoid. I had spent weeks hoping Matthew had panicked, made a terrible decision, and convinced himself he could replace the money before I noticed. The prepaid phone suggested something colder. He had prepared to keep me uninformed. "I need you to promise me something," Rachel said. "Please don't confront him again yet." "Why?" "If he knows we've compared stories, he may delete records or move whatever money remains." Her voice had changed. The frightened bride was still there, but now the trained compliance officer was speaking. "We need copies of everything," she continued. "Statements, texts, invoices, contracts, anything that shows what he told each of us." I hesitated. Remaining silent after discovering a theft felt almost like giving permission. But silence could also be strategic. Matthew already believed I was too frightened to challenge him. If he continued believing that he might make mistakes, "I won't tell him you called," I said. "Thank you. But Rachel, I need to ask you something difficult." "I know. Are you still planning to marry him?" She did not answer immediately. "I don't know who I'm supposed to marry anymore," she finally said. "The man I loved would never do this to his mother." The pain in her voice broke something inside me. Until then, part of me had imagined Rachel as the person for whom my money had been stolen. But she was not my enemy. She was another woman, standing inside Matthew's web of deception. Rachel asked me to read every transaction description aloud. When I reached Read Premier Events, I heard her typing. "I searched the Ohio Business Registry earlier," she said. "The company exists, but it doesn't have a website, reviews, or a listed office. Who owns it?" I couldn't access the full registration from my phone. "I'm checking now." For several moments, all I heard was the clicking of keys. Then Rachel stopped. "Oh, God." "What is it?" "The registered agent is Jason Reed." I knew the name immediately. Jason had been Matthew's closest friend since college. He had attended holiday dinners in my home, stood beside Matthew at Thomas's funeral, and was supposed to serve as best man at the wedding. Rachel continued reading. "The company was created 4 months ago, just after Matthew started planning the wedding." My eyes settled on the photograph of Matthew and Thomas on the mantel. This was no desperate attempt to save a ceremony. My son and his closest friend had created a company before the money disappeared, and $28,000 of my savings had been transferred directly into it. Whatever Matthew was hiding, the lie went far beyond unpaid wedding bills. Rachel and I agreed to meet the following morning at a small cafe near the northern edge of Columbus. It was far from Matthew's apartment, his office, and every place he might expect either of us to be. I arrived first and chose a table in the back corner. I carried a canvas shopping bag filled with bank statements, printed screenshots, my original authorization form, and the notes I had written after confronting Matthew. Rachel entered 10 minutes later, wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and dark glasses. She looked nothing like a woman who was supposed to become a bride in 2 days. She sat across from me and placed a thick folder on the table. "I brought every legitimate wedding contract," she said. "I also printed the emails from our shared planning account." I looked at the engagement ring on her hand. She noticed. "I haven't decided what to do yet," she said quietly. "But I'm not going to make that decision until I know everything." We began with the $31,000 transfer marked venue services. Rachel opened the contract for the Franklin Grand Hotel, where the ceremony and reception were scheduled. Robert had paid the agreed balance directly. The hotel had issued receipts for the ballroom tables, chairs, basic lighting staff, and security deposit. At first, the $31,000 still appeared to have no destination. Then Rachel found a second group of emails. Matthew had ordered upgrades without consulting her. He added imported white roses, a premium liquor package, a larger live band custom lighting luxury cars for the wedding party, and an elaborate installation for the reception entrance. Rachel stared at the invoices in disbelief. I told him I didn't want any of this. One invoice listed a champagne tower that cost more than I had earned in a month during my final year at Lincoln Elementary. Another charged thousands of dollars for a decorative ceiling display that would be removed after 5 hours. Why would he spend this much? I asked. Rachel's face tightened. Because my father's business associates are attending. Matthew kept saying people needed to see that he could provide the same kind of life my father could. The $31,000 had not saved the venue from cancellation. It had purchased unnecessary luxury upgrades Matthew wanted so he could appear wealthy. That truth was painful, but at least we knew where part of my money had gone. The $27,000 transfer was more difficult. Its description referred only to private event expenses. None of the wedding vendors recognized it. Rachel searched the shared email account for the exact transaction date and found a message Matthew had accidentally forwarded from his personal account. The subject line read, "Final settlement confirmation." The payment had gone to an equipment leasing company, not a wedding business. Rachel covered her mouth. I know what this is. Matthew had once told her he was considering investing in a small office furniture distribution venture. A former colleague claimed they could purchase used corporate furniture and resell it to new businesses. Matthew later said he had decided not to participate because the project was too risky. Apparently, that was another lie. The attached settlement letter showed that Matthew had personally guaranteed leased warehouse equipment. The venture had failed, and the company threatened legal action unless he paid $27,000. He told me this business never started, Rachel said. He told me he was expecting a large bonus from work. Rachel shook her head. His company canceled bonuses this year. He complained about it for weeks. Every answer exposed another lie beneath the previous one. Matthew had not planned to repay me with a bonus. He had used my money to erase a debt he had hidden from both of us, then invented future income to keep me quiet. We turned to the final $28,000. The receipt Rachel found proved the money went to Reed Premier Events, but it did not reveal what Jason did with it. Rachel opened the wedding planning emails and searched Jason's name. There were no vendor contracts, event proposals, or service descriptions connected to his company. Then she remembered something. 3 weeks earlier, Matthew had shown her photographs of a luxury condominium near the Scioto River. He claimed his employer had arranged the property as part of an upcoming promotion. He said we could move in after the honeymoon, Rachel told me. I thought it was strange that the company would provide a condominium, but he said the regional position required him to entertain clients. Did you see any documents? Only a welcome packet. Rachel opened her folder and removed a glossy brochure. A handwritten note on the cover said, "Matthew and Rachel, welcome to your new home." Inside was a preliminary purchase summary. The buyer was listed as Matthew Wilson with a $28,000 deposit credited toward the unit. The payment date matched the transfer to Jason's company. The name Reed Premier Events did not appear anywhere in the purchase documents, but the identical amount and date were too precise to ignore. Rachel called the condominium sales office from the cafe. She identified herself and asked whether the deposit had been paid by Matthew's employer. The sales representative could not disclose private banking details, but she confirmed that the condominium was a personal purchase. No employer housing arrangement existed. After the call, Rachel stared through the cafe window. He was going to take me there after the wedding and let me believe his company paid for it. I understood then that Matthew had constructed an entire version of himself with other people's money. He used Robert's payments to create an extravagant wedding. He used my savings to add luxuries, settle his hidden debt, and secure a condominium. Then he planned to stand before both families as a successful man who had provided everything. This was never about making you happy, I said gently. Rachel looked at me. It was about making people admire him. She removed the engagement ring and held it in her palm, though she did not put it away. I don't know this man. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Neither of us spoke for a while. Eventually, Rachel asked to see the authorization I had signed after my hip surgery. I gave her the original document from the blue folder. She read it carefully. "This is very limited," she said. "It only covers medical and necessary household payments during your recovery." "That's what I intended." "Then the bank should never have allowed these transfers under this document." The previous afternoon, after finding the prepaid phone, I had called the bank and requested copies of every authorization connected to my account. The representative sent them through the bank's secure message system. I opened my laptop and showed Rachel the downloaded file. The first page looked similar to my original form, but the remaining pages were different. They granted Matthew authority to transfer funds, change account, contact information, communicate with bank employees, and manage nearly every aspect of my savings. Rachel placed the bank copy beside my original. The page numbers did not match. The typeface was slightly different. The signature on the final page resembled mine, but the letters were too smooth. I always paused slightly between the H and W in my name. On this copy, the signature flowed without interruption. "That isn't my signature," I said. Rachel studied both versions. "Are you certain I signed my name thousands of times during my years at the school? I know how my hand moves. I did not sign this." The room around us seemed to fade. Misusing temporary access was already a terrible betrayal. But this was something far more deliberate. Matthew had not merely exceeded the authority I gave him. He had created broader authority for himself and placed my name beneath it. Rachel closed the laptop. "We need an attorney, Helen." I looked at the forged signature again and felt the final piece of denial disappear. My son had not borrowed my money. He had built a legal-looking path into my life, walked through it, and trusted that I would be too frightened or ashamed to stop him. Susan Grant had been my friend for nearly 25 years. We met when her daughter enrolled at Lincoln Elementary and accidentally brought a stray kitten into the school inside her backpack. Susan arrived expecting a disciplinary meeting and found me feeding the kitten with milk from the staff refrigerator. By the end of the afternoon, she had adopted the animal and we had become friends. She later built a successful legal practice focused on elder law estate planning and financial abuse. I had always admired her work, but I never imagined I would need her professional help against my own son. Rachel and I went directly from the cafe to Susan's office. Susan listened without interrupting as we described the transfers, Matthew's conflicting stories, the prepaid phone, Jason's company, the condominium, and the authorization document. When I finished, she removed her glasses and folded her hands on the desk. "Helen, I need to ask you this clearly. Did you authorize Matthew to take any of that money?" "No." "Did you sign the expanded authorization the bank has on file num? Do you want to protect your son from legal consequences, or do you want to protect yourself?" The question hurt because Susan understood that those goals might no longer be compatible. "I want my money back," I said, "and I want him stopped before he takes anything else." Susan nodded. "Then we begin today." She examined the original authorization under a bright desk lamp. It granted Matthew limited authority to pay medical and necessary household expenses while I recovered from surgery. It contained an expiration condition tied to my recovery and did not allow large transfers, contact changes, investments, loans, or property transactions. The version submitted to the bank was 6 pages longer. Someone had copied language from a broad financial power of attorney form and attached it to a modified first page. The signature looked convincing at a glance, but several details were wrong. The date was written in a style I never used. My middle initial was missing. The witness section contained a name none of us recognized. Susan placed the 2 documents side by side. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," she said. "Someone created authority you never granted." I felt sick hearing the truth stated so plainly. Rachel reached for my hand. Susan instructed me not to contact Matthew or Jason. Any warning could give them time to destroy records, transfer money, or create new documents. She also advised Rachel to behave normally until we understood what evidence remained available. Our first call was to the bank's fraud department. Susan identified herself as my attorney while I confirmed my identity and stated that the transfers were unauthorized. I formally revoked every permission associated with Matthew. The bank immediately disabled online access, froze outgoing transfers, and placed a verbal security code on the account. The fraud representative asked why I had waited to report the missing money. The question filled me with shame. I believed my son when he said he would return it. Susan leaned toward the phone. My client was manipulated by a trusted family member who had access during a medical recovery. Her delay does not make the transactions authorized. Her firmness steadied me. The bank opened an official investigation and assigned the case to Angela Brooks, a senior investigator specializing in suspicious transfers and vulnerable customer complaints. Angela joined the call 20 minutes later. Her voice was calm and direct. She asked when I signed the original form where it happened, who was present, and whether I recognized the witness listed on the expanded document. I answered every question carefully. Then she asked about the account alerts. I told her my phone number and email had been replaced and described finding the prepaid phone in my guest room. "Do not turn that phone on again unless necessary," Angela said. "Place it somewhere secure. Do not delete anything." She requested photographs of the device, the charger, and the location where I found them. Susan documented everything before placing the phone in a sealed envelope. Angela explained that the bank would preserve login records, device information, contact changes, employee notes, internal alerts, and security footage from any branch visits connected to the transfers. The records may show who logged in, where the request originated, and how the authorization was accepted, she said. "What happens to my money?" I asked. "If any funds remain in reachable accounts, we may be able to restrict them. If the money has already been spent, recovery becomes more complicated." My throat tightened. That was almost everything Thomas and I saved. "I understand," Angela replied. "But the sooner we act, the better our chances." Susan's staff sent formal preservation notices to the Bank Reed Premier Events and the condominium sales company. The notices required them to retain transaction records and communications related to Matthew, Jason, and my money. Next, Susan turned her attention to my house. Thomas and I had paid off the mortgage 7 years before his death. The home was worth far more than my remaining savings, and the thought of Matthew reaching it frightened me more than I wanted to admit. Susan checked the county property records. The deed still listed me as the sole owner, and no new lien appeared. She arranged a property fraud alert so I would be notified if anyone attempted to file documents against the house. She also prepared a written revocation stating that Matthew had no authority to sell, mortgage transfer, or manage any real estate belonging to me. "You need new passwords for everything," Rachel said. "Not variations of old ones. Completely new passwords." Together, we secured my email, mobile account, insurance portal, and financial profiles. We changed my security questions to answers Matthew could not guess. I removed spare documents from my house and placed them in Susan's office safe. Every step made me feel safer, but each one also reminded me how deeply Matthew knew my life. He knew the street where I grew up. He knew Thomas's middle name. He knew the name of my first school and the hospital where I was born. The personal details families share out of love had become keys he could use against me. Late that afternoon, Angela called again. She had reviewed the bank's preliminary notes. The 3 transfers had triggered internal alerts because of their size and because my account had shown little unusual activity for years. "Then why were they approved?" I asked. "A branch employee documented that your authorized representative confirmed the transactions were related to family event expenses." "Did anyone call me?" The notes indicate a call was placed to the number on file. The number on file was the prepaid phone Matthew had hidden in my guest room. So he answered his own verification call, I said. That is one possibility we're examining. Angela also discovered that the expanded authorization had been delivered in person to a branch. The employee scanned it, added Matthew's access, and failed to compare it carefully with the limited document already in the system. The bank had not simply been deceived. Someone had ignored warning signs that should have protected me. Susan asked Angela to preserve the branch security footage and identify the employee who approved the form. Angela agreed, though she warned that the investigation would take time. By then, the office windows had grown dark. Rachel left to meet Matthew for a scheduled dinner, carrying the burden of pretending nothing had changed. Before Susan drove me home, she looked at me across her desk. You did the right thing today. It doesn't feel right. Protecting yourself from someone you love rarely feels simple. The next morning, Angela called before 8. She had found another note in the bank's internal system. 2 weeks after the final transfer, Matthew contacted a lending specialist and asked what documents would be required to open a home equity line of credit. The property address he provided was mine. He had not yet submitted a completed application, but he knew the estimated value of my house and the fact that it had no mortgage. I looked around the kitchen Thomas and I had remodeled with our own hands. The $86,000 had not been the end of Matthew's plan. If I had signed whatever he placed in front of me next, my son might have taken the home his father spent a lifetime helping me build. Rachel called me from her car after dinner with Matthew. I don't know how I made it through 2 hours without confronting him, she said. Her voice sounded exhausted. Matthew had spent the evening discussing the honeymoon, the reception schedule, and the condominium as though nothing was wrong. He complained about the bank's technical problems but claimed they would be resolved before the wedding. He looked directly at me and lied without hesitation. Rachel said, I kept waiting for some sign of guilt. Did he suspect anything? I don't think so. But he asked twice whether I had spoken to you. I tightened my grip on the phone. What did you say I told him we discussed my wedding shoes and your dress? Matthew had smiled and changed the subject, but Rachel noticed him watching her more carefully afterward. Susan had warned us that the next 48 hours would be dangerous, not physically, she believed, but financially and emotionally. Matthew knew his accounts had been restricted. If he realized we were cooperating, he might destroy evidence or pressure Jason to move whatever money remained. Rachel needed to continue pretending she trusted him. The idea made me uncomfortable. You don't have to keep seeing him, I said. You can walk away now. I will walk away, she replied. But first, we need enough evidence to keep him from doing this to you again. The following morning, Rachel returned to Susan's office. She brought additional documents Matthew had shared during their engagement, income estimates, housing information, and messages about wedding contributions. We examined them together. Matthew had told Rachel he earned nearly twice his actual salary. He claimed his company planned to promote him to regional director after the wedding, but Rachel contacted no one at his workplace and violated no privacy rules. She simply compared his statements with a financing application he had asked her to review months earlier. The income listed on that application was far lower. Matthew had also told her the company would provide the condominium because he needed to host clients. The purchase summary proved it was a personal transaction. No employer appeared on the document. He built our future out of statements I never verified, Rachel said. Susan shook her head. You were planning to marry him, not audit him. Rachel looked down at her engagement ring. I should have questioned why every answer came with a reason I wasn't allowed to check. Matthew had repeatedly discouraged her from speaking directly with his employer, Jason, and even me about money. Whenever she asked practical questions, he accused her of doubting his ability to provide. It was the same method he used with me. He did not merely tell lies. He made us feel cruel for requesting the truth. Rachel opened a series of text messages in which Matthew discussed wedding expenses. In one, he claimed he had personally paid the entertainment deposit. In another, he said I had voluntarily contributed toward transportation. A third message stated that Jason's company had given him a professional discount. None of those statements matched the bank records. Susan printed the messages and added them to the growing file. "We need to preserve everything exactly as it exists," she said. "No editing, no provoking him, and no attempts to access accounts that don't belong to you." Rachel nodded. "I understand." Our goal was not to trap Matthew into inventing a new crime. It was to document the choices he had already made. While Rachel and Susan organized the evidence, I sat near the office window and watched people crossing the parking lot. Most carried coffee cups or briefcases. They moved through an ordinary Thursday, unaware that 2 days before a wedding, a mother and a bride were quietly assembling proof against the groom. A wave of guilt rose inside me. If I had confronted him sooner, maybe none of this would have reached Rachel. She turned toward me. "Helen, he did this, not you. But he used my account to create the wedding he promised you. He used your trust to deceive both of us. What if reporting him destroys his life?" Rachel's expression softened, but her answer remained firm. "Matthew made decisions that could have left you without savings or a home. Protecting him from consequences would not make him better. It would teach him that you are still available to pay the price." Her words reminded me of Thomas. When Matthew was 16, he damaged a neighbor's fence while driving without permission. I wanted to pay for the repair and keep the incident quiet. Thomas insisted Matthew work weekends to repay the cost. "If we erase every consequence," Thomas told me, "we erase his chance to become responsible." At the time, I thought Thomas was being too strict. Now I wondered how often I had confused rescuing Matthew with loving him. Susan recommended a controlled family meeting after the rehearsal dinner. Rachel would ask Matthew to explain the transactions in front of Robert and me. Susan would remain nearby, and the evidence would already be secured. "We are not staging a public humiliation," Susan said. "The purpose is to hear his explanation and prevent him from claiming later that everyone misunderstood." Rachel agreed, though I could see the fear in her eyes. What if he refuses to answer? Then his refusal tells us something. What if he tries to leave? We let him leave. No one blocks him or threatens him. The plan was simple, but nothing about it felt safe emotionally. Rachel returned home that evening and behaved as naturally as possible. She discussed seating arrangements, confirmed the rehearsal schedule, and listened while Matthew complained that the bank had embarrassed him. He claimed the account restrictions were caused by an automated security review, probably because Mom is old and her account isn't used to large transfers, he said. When Rachel repeated that sentence to me later, anger burned through my fear. Matthew was already preparing to use my age as an explanation. That night, he called me. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked. "I'm tired. Rachel says you two discussed wedding clothes." "We did." There was a short pause. "You haven't been worried about the money again, have you? I've been thinking. You always overthink things, Mom. That's why I handled the payments for you." I forced myself not to react. "When will the bank release your accounts? Soon. I've already spoken to someone." He was lying again. Angela had told Susan the restrictions would remain while the transfers were investigated. Matthew shifted to a warmer tone. "I need you to trust me for 2 more days. After the wedding, everything will make sense. What happens after the wedding, I'll explain then." Before ending the call, he reminded me that the rehearsal dinner began at 6 on Friday. He wanted me there early because he had something important for us to complete together. The following afternoon, he sent me a message. "Mom, I need your signature on one final wedding document. It confirms the family contributions and protects all of us. Bring your identification to the rehearsal dinner." I read the message twice before forwarding it to Susan. Within minutes, she called. "Do not sign anything. I wasn't planning to. Helen, this document may be his attempt to make the transfers look voluntary. I stared at Matthew's message. He knew his accounts had been restricted. He knew someone might be examining the money. And now, just hours before the rehearsal dinner, he needed my signature on a document he had never mentioned before. My son believed that if he smiled, called me Mom, and placed a pen in my hand, I would help him erase what he had done. This time, I intended to let him believe it until I knew exactly what he wanted me to sign. Matthew arrived at my house shortly after 10 the next morning, carrying a bouquet of yellow roses and a white paper bag from my favorite bakery. He had not brought me flowers since Mother's Day. "I thought we could have breakfast together," he said brightly. "Just the two of us before everything becomes crazy." He kissed my cheek and walked into the kitchen without waiting for an invitation. He placed the flowers in Thomas's old glass pitcher, arranged 2 cinnamon rolls on plates, and poured coffee as though he were still the attentive son I had trusted. For a few dangerous minutes, I almost wanted to believe that version of him was real. Matthew spoke about harmless things. He asked whether my dress was ready, whether I needed transportation to the rehearsal dinner, and whether I remembered which relatives would sit at my table. Then he reached inside his leather bag and removed a document. "There's one boring detail we need to finish." He placed the papers beside my plate and slid a pen toward me. The heading read, "Family Wedding Contribution and Asset Authorization." "What is this?" I asked. "Just a confirmation that the money used for the wedding was a voluntary family gift. I don't remember volunteering." Matthew smiled as if I had made a joke. "We already discussed this. You told me you would repay it." "And I will. This wording is only for tax purposes." He tapped the signature line. "My accountant says we need documentation showing that the money wasn't a business loan. Otherwise, the IRS could create problems for all of us." I looked at him over the top of the document. "Who is your accountant?" "Someone my company uses." "What is his name?" Matthew's smile weakened. "Mom, why does that matter if he is giving me financial advice? I would like to know his name." "He isn't advising you. He's helping me organize paperwork." "Then why does the paperwork require my signature?" I kept my tone mild, even slightly confused. Susan had told me not to argue. My task was to understand what Matthew wanted and allow him to reveal how far he was willing to go. He leaned closer. "This is exactly why I wanted to handle everything for you. You turned simple issues into reasons to worry." I lowered my eyes to the pages. The first section described the $86,000 as an unconditional wedding gift, given freely without expectation of repayment. If I signed, it would directly contradict everything I had written after our first confrontation. The second section stated that Matthew had acted with my full knowledge and permission when communicating with financial institutions. I could feel my pulse in my throat. This says I approved the transfers before they happened. "You did." "No, I didn't. You told me you wanted to help. I never said you could take $86,000. Matthew pushed his chair back. "Not in those exact words, perhaps. But you knew the wedding was expensive. That is not permission?" His face tightened, then softened again, almost immediately. He reached across the table. "Mom, I made a mistake by not explaining every detail. I admit that, but signing this protects the family." "Which family?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Matthew stared at me. Then he laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "You're upset. That's understandable. Rachel has been emotional too. Everyone is under pressure. Has Rachel seen this document? I'll handle Rachel." The way he said it made me understand that he planned to place another version of the truth before her. I turned to the second page and pretended to struggle with the small print. "My eyes are tired. I need time to read it." There's nothing complicated. It looks complicated to me. Matthew picked up the pen and held it out. Sign it now, and I'll explain anything you don't understand afterward. The sentence frightened me more than his anger. No. His arm remained extended. What do you mean, no? I mean, I don't sign documents I haven't read. His expression changed. The affectionate son disappeared. In his place sat a man who believed I was obstructing something he already owned. Do you want to destroy my wedding? I want to understand what I am signing. If you accuse me of stealing, Rachel will leave me. If she leaves because of what you did, that will be your responsibility. Matthew stood so quickly that his chair scraped across the floor. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. I looked at the flowers, the pastries, and the coffee he had prepared. None of it felt like kindness anymore. It was decoration around a demand. You helped me because I was your mother, I said. Was I supposed to pay you $86,000 for that? I put my life on hold after Dad died. You visited me and helped with errands. I appreciated it. You needed me. Yes, I needed my son. I did not hire a financial manager. His face reddened. You have no idea how difficult you can be. You forget passwords, you misplace papers, and then you blame me when you get confused. I felt the intended wound. He wanted me to doubt my memory and fear that others might doubt it too. But I remembered every page I had signed after surgery. I remembered the transfers. I remembered the hidden phone. I am not confused, I said. Matthew began pacing. If this becomes a legal issue, people will ask whether you understood the arrangement. Do you really want strangers examining your memory and deciding whether you can manage your own life? The threat was wrapped in concern, but it was still a threat. Are you saying no one will believe me because I'm old? I'm saying these situations can become ugly. He stopped beside Thomas's photograph. If you refuse to help me, you could lose Rachel, future grandchildren, and me. Is being right worth spending the rest of your life alone? For years, loneliness had been my greatest fear. Matthew knew that. He had chosen the one blade sharp enough to make me hesitate. I looked at Thomas's face in the photograph and remembered his final promise. What remained was meant to protect my life. I still need time, I said. Matthew watched me for several seconds. Then he seemed to decide fear had done enough work. Fine. Bring the signed document to the rehearsal dinner. He gathered his bag, but left the papers behind. At the door, he kissed my forehead. I love you, Mom. Don't force me to choose between you and my future. After his car disappeared, I locked the door and photographed every page. I wrote down his exact statements, including the threat about my age and mental capacity. Then I called Susan. She arrived within an hour. We read the document line by line. The final section was buried beneath dense language about family assets and future reimbursements. Susan circled one paragraph and read, If I signed, I would not only declare the $86,000 a gift, I would authorize Matthew to manage proceeds from any future sale, refinancing, or transfer of my residence. This gives him a path to your house, Susan said. My hands turned cold. The document had nothing to do with taxes. Matthew was trying to erase the theft, validate his control, and obtain written authority over the largest asset I owned. Susan placed the papers inside an evidence folder. He knows the bank is asking questions. He needs your signature before someone formally challenges him. I looked at the yellow roses wilting slightly in Thomas's picture. Matthew had come into my home pretending to repair our relationship. In reality, he had brought me the next stage of his plan. The $86,000 had not satisfied him. If I had signed those pages, my son might have taken the house next and convinced the world that I had willingly handed it to him. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private dining room at the Franklin Grand Hotel, the same historic building where the wedding was supposed to take place the next afternoon. I arrived shortly before 6, wearing a navy dress Thomas had always loved. He once told me the color made my eyes look brighter. I chose it because I needed to feel that some part of him was walking into that room with me. The hotel lobby glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. White roses stood in tall glass arrangements, and soft piano music drifted from the adjoining lounge. Everything looked elegant, peaceful, and expensive. No one looking at us would have guessed that the groom had stolen his mother's retirement savings. Susan was already inside the hotel. She waited in a quiet business lounge on the first floor with copies of the unsigned document, the legitimate authorization, and the bank records. Angela was not attending the dinner as a guest. She had arranged to meet Susan nearby because the bank had completed another stage of its review that afternoon. They wanted to be available if Matthew attempted to submit or move anything after demanding my signature. Rachel met me outside the private dining room. She wore a pale blue dress and her engagement ring. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes were strained. "Are you all right?" she whispered. "No. Neither am I." We stood together for a moment before entering. Matthew was near the bar, laughing with Jason Reed and 2 members of the wedding party. He wore a charcoal suit and held a glass of bourbon. When he saw me, he smiled broadly. "There's my beautiful mother." He crossed the room and hugged me. To everyone watching, it must have appeared affectionate, but his mouth moved close to my ear. "Did you bring the document? I left it in my car." His arms tightened around me for a fraction of a second. "We'll get it after dinner." Then he stepped back and announced loudly, "Mom, you look wonderful." Jason approached and kissed my cheek. He had eaten at my Thanksgiving table for years, yet now I knew his company had received $28,000 of my money. "Helen tomorrow is going to be unforgettable," he said. I studied his face, searching for guilt. "Some days are remembered for reasons no one expects," I replied. His smile faltered. Rachel touched my arm and guided me toward my seat before the conversation could become dangerous. The dining room held about 30 people, close relatives, the wedding party, and a few friends from each family. Robert sat across from me. He greeted me warmly, but did not mention the call or investigation. Rachel had told him enough to prepare him for the private meeting after dinner, and his calm expression concealed his anger remarkably well. Matthew had arranged the seating so he occupied the center of the long table. He looked like a man presiding over his own success. During the first course, he told stories about the wedding plans and thanked everyone for traveling. People praised the flowers, the hotel, and the live band scheduled for the reception. Matthew accepted each compliment as though he had personally paid for every detail. His Aunt Carol lifted her wine glass. "You have certainly spared no expense." Matthew smiled. "Rachel deserves the best." The words turned my stomach. A cousin asked how he had managed such a large celebration while also buying a condominium. Matthew laughed and said successful planning was about knowing how to move money at the right time. Rachel's hand froze around her water glass. I looked down at my plate. Then Robert rose to offer a toast. He spoke about Rachel's childhood, her late mother, and the importance of beginning marriage with honesty. The word landed heavily between us. Finally, he turned toward Matthew. "I also want to thank you for allowing me the privilege of paying for my daughter's wedding," he said. "A father dreams of doing that, and I was grateful to cover the venue and principal vendors." A confused silence followed. Aunt Carol glanced from Robert to Matthew. "I thought Matthew paid for the hotel." Matthew's smile remained in place, but the color drained from his face. "We divided things in a way that worked for everyone," he said quickly. Robert raised his glass. Of course, the important thing is that everything has been fully paid. Rachel met my eyes. Matthew noticed. The second course arrived, but he barely touched it. He checked his phone repeatedly and watched Rachel whenever she spoke to her father. Jason leaned over to whisper something, and Matthew answered with a sharp shake of his head. Halfway through dinner, Matthew came to my chair. Mom, I need you for a moment. I followed him into the hallway. As soon as the dining room door closed, his public smile vanished. Why did you tell people Robert didn't pay? I didn't. Then why did he make that speech? Perhaps he wanted to acknowledge his contribution. Matthew stepped closer. Where is the document? In my car, like I said. Give me your keys. I will get it myself. Why are you making this difficult? I'm not. Dinner is still being served. He looked through the glass panel in the door. Rachel was speaking quietly with Robert. Have you been talking to her? We've discussed the wedding. About the money, I allowed a pause long enough to increase his uncertainty. Why would that concern you? His jaw tightened. Because Rachel is already stressed. She doesn't need you filling her head with confusion. I thought you said everything would make sense after the wedding. It will if you stop interfering. He lowered his voice. Get the document before dessert. I nodded, as though frightened. When I returned to the table, Rachel slipped a folded note beneath my napkin. Private conference room after dinner. Dad is ready. Susan knows. The plan was moving forward. We would allow the guests to leave, then Rachel, Robert, Matthew, and I would meet privately. Jason would be asked to remain if possible. Susan would stay nearby until we needed her. Dessert arrived, small slices of lemon cake decorated with white icing. I could barely swallow one bite. Matthew kept checking his phone. Then the device vibrated against the table. He glanced at the screen and his expression changed. A message appeared long enough for me to read part of it from across the table. Outgoing transaction, declined account, restricted. Matthew stood abruptly. His chair struck the wall behind him. Several people stopped talking. Is everything all right? Rachel asked. Just a work issue. He walked into the hallway while dialing someone. Jason followed him seconds later. Rachel looked at me. Do you think he knows? Not yet. But he knows someone has stopped the money. I excused myself and went toward the restroom. From the hallway corner, I saw Matthew near the elevator speaking angrily into his phone. I authorized the transfer, he said. You can't freeze my account because an old woman got confused. He turned and saw me. For one suspended moment, neither of us moved. Then his eyes dropped to the handbag on my arm, searching for the document he believed could save him. His expression hardened. The charming groom was gone. He ended the call and began walking toward me. Behind him, the dining room doors opened. Rachel and Robert stepped into the hallway. Our careful silence had brought us to the moment Matthew feared most. For the first time, the three people he had lied to were standing together. Matthew stopped several feet away from me. His eyes moved from my face to Rachel and then to Robert. The anger he had shown while speaking on the phone disappeared behind a strained smile. What is this? He asked. A family meeting? Rachel folded her arms. Yes. I have work problems to handle. This is more important. Matthew glanced toward the dining room. Most guests were gathering coats and saying goodbye, unaware of the confrontation unfolding in the hallway. Not here, Robert said. Rachel reserved a conference room. Matthew gave a short laugh. You're being dramatic. No, Rachel replied. I've been pretending everything was normal for 2 days. I'm finished pretending. The four of us entered a small conference room at the end of the corridor. A polished table stood beneath bright recessed lights. There were no flowers, music, or smiling relatives, only the people Matthew had deceived. Before sitting down, I opened my handbag and activated the recording on my phone exactly as Susan had instructed. Because I was participating in the conversation, She had explained how to preserve my own record lawfully. A copy of the bank statement and the unsigned contribution document remained inside my bag. Matthew stood near the door. "Where is the paper?" "Mom." Rachel stared at him. "You brought her a document. It's routine financial paperwork. The one declaring that she voluntarily gave you $86,000? His face changed. Then he turned to me. "You told her." Rachel placed the receipt from his car on the table. "No." "You did." Matthew looked at the receipt but did not touch it. "I can explain that." "Please do," Robert said. Matthew pulled out a chair and sat down. The wedding became more expensive than expected. Mom offered to help. "I did not," I said. He ignored me. There were last-minute upgrades and unexpected vendor charges. Everyone wanted this weekend to be perfect, and I made sure it would be. Robert remained standing. I paid the venue caterer, florist, photographer, band, and original transportation agreement. Which unpaid bill required $86,000? Matthew's eyes narrowed. "You paid what you wanted to control. I paid what Rachel and I agreed to pay. You made me look like I couldn't provide for my own wife." Robert's voice remained calm. "This is not about how you looked. This is about money taken from your mother." Matthew turned toward Rachel. "You complained that the wedding was too simple." "I never said that. You wanted your father's friends to be impressed. You wanted them to be impressed." Matthew leaned back. "Fine. I upgraded some things. That doesn't make me a criminal." Rachel opened her folder and removed the invoices. $31,000 went to imported flowers, premium alcohol, luxury cars, custom lighting, and other things I specifically told you I did not want. He glanced at the documents. "You would have enjoyed them once you saw everything together." And the $27,000 paid to the equipment leasing company. Matthew's confidence weakened. That was temporary. It had nothing to do with the wedding. It protected our future. If that debt had gone to court, it would have destroyed my credit. You told me the business never started. It failed before I could explain it. Rachel placed the condominium purchase summary beside the invoices. And this, Matthew did not answer. "You told me your employer provided that condominium," she continued. "But $28,000 of Helen's money went through Jason's company and became your deposit. It was going to be our home." "Purchased with stolen money. Don't call it that. What should I call it?" Matthew struck the table with his palm. "A solution." The sound made me flinch. He saw my reaction and lowered his voice. "I was fixing problems. That is what everyone expected me to do." "No one expected you to take my savings," I said. "You weren't using it." The words entered the room like a cold wind. I looked at him carefully. "That money was protecting me. From what you have a pension. Your house is paid off. You barely spend anything. That does not make it yours. I'm your only child." So one day, all of it comes to me anyway." Rachel closed her eyes. Robert looked away in disgust. I forced myself to remain steady. An inheritance is something given after a person dies. It is not permission to steal from them while they are alive. Matthew stood. "I did not steal. I had authorization." I removed the two documents from my handbag and laid them side by side. "This is the authorization I signed after surgery. This is the one the bank received." He stared at them. "I don't know what you're implying. The second document contains powers I never granted and a signature I never wrote." "That's ridiculous. Then tell us who prepared it." "My attorney can handle this." "You told the bank you were acting with my full permission. You changed my telephone number and email. Security alerts went to a prepaid phone hidden in my guest room." For the first time, Matthew appeared genuinely frightened. You found that, yes. His face hardened again. You're confused about when you approved everything. There is nothing wrong with my memory. You've been struggling since Dad died. You forget conversations. Rachel stepped between us. Stop using her age to protect yourself. You stay out of this. I was supposed to marry you tomorrow. I am already in it. Matthew ran both hands through his hair. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Your father walks into every room like he owns it. His friends ask about my career and look at me as if I'm not good enough for you. I never asked you to compete with my father. You didn't have to. I saw the way people looked at me, so you built a false life. I built the life you expected. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. No, you built a performance and expected Helen to pay for it. Matthew turned to me. I was going to replace the money. With what bonus Rachel says your company canceled them? I would have found another way. By borrowing against my house. His face went still. The silence confirmed more than a denial could have. Robert stepped forward. This conversation is over. No, it isn't, Matthew said. This is my wedding. No one is destroying it over paperwork. I stood slowly. You destroyed it when you decided love gave you ownership of my life. I helped you for years. You were my son. I believed you were helping because you loved me, not because you were waiting to collect payment. I gave up time for you after Dad died, and I gave you 39 years of love. Neither of us received the right to steal from the other. His voice rose. You owe me something. I owe you honesty. I owe you the chance to face what you have done. But I do not owe you my retirement, my house, or my silence. Matthew looked toward Rachel as if expecting her to rescue him. We can still fix this, he said. The wedding can continue. I'll sign a repayment agreement. Rachel looked down at her ring. For several seconds, she turned it slowly around her finger. Then, she removed it. Matthew's face emptied. Rachel, don't. She placed the ring on top of the forged authorization. I cannot marry a man who steals from his mother and calls it providing for me. You're choosing her over me. I'm choosing the truth. Matthew stared at the ring. The documents and the evidence spread across the table. 24 hours earlier, he had expected to stand before our families and begin the life he had purchased with lies. Instead, his bride walked out of the room without him. And for the first time, Matthew understood that I was no longer going to save him from the consequences of what he had done. Rachel remained in the hallway after leaving the conference room. I found her leaning against the wall near a tall window, staring at the engagement ring still visible through the glass door behind us. She had left it on top of the forged authorization, as though returning evidence rather than jewelry. I thought I would feel relieved, she said. You ended the future you believed you were going to have. Relief may take time. Her face crumpled, and I held her while she cried. Robert joined us moments later. He placed his jacket over Rachel's shoulders and told her she did not need to explain anything to the remaining guests that night. But the wedding was scheduled for the following afternoon. Vendors, relatives, and friends needed to be notified. Rachel refused to turn the cancellation into a public spectacle. She contacted the hotel coordinator first and asked that the ceremony and reception be canceled due to a serious personal matter. Robert handled the catering, transportation, and hotel arrangements. Members of the wedding party received a short message stating that the marriage would not take place and requesting privacy. No accusations were posted online. No embarrassing announcement was made to the guests. Rachel wanted the truth acknowledged, not performed for entertainment. Matthew did not share her restraint. He stormed out of the conference room and demanded that Rachel return the ring. When she told him it was on the table, he accused her of planning the entire confrontation with me. You wanted an excuse to leave, he said. You and my mother used a financial misunderstanding to humiliate me. This was not a misunderstanding, Rachel replied. You never gave me the chance to fix it. I gave you the chance to tell the truth. You chose to blame everyone else. Matthew turned toward me. Are you happy now? No. You destroyed my wedding. You destroyed it when you stole from me. His expression twisted. You always resented Rachel because she was taking me away from you. The accusation was so absurd that for a moment I could not answer. Rachel stepped forward. Do not put this on Helen, I called her. Matthew stared at her. You called my mother behind my back. I found the transfer receipt. He looked toward Jason, who had entered the hallway during the argument. You left that in the car, Jason asked. The question told us he knew more than he had admitted. Robert moved between the two men and Rachel. This evening is over. Leave my daughter alone. Matthew pointed at me. When the bank realizes she authorized everything, you'll all regret this. Susan appeared from the nearby lounge. She has revoked every authorization and all communication regarding Helen's finances will now go through me. Matthew's face drained of color. You hired a lawyer against your own son? I hired a lawyer to protect myself. He looked at Susan, then at me as though finally understanding that the frightened widow he expected to control had disappeared. Matthew and Jason left together. Angela called Susan within minutes. Someone had just attempted to move funds from an account connected to Reed Premier events. The transaction was blocked because the account had been flagged during the investigation. A second attempt was made to withdraw the remaining balance linked to the condominium deposit. That failed too. Matthew had walked out of the confrontation and immediately tried to place the money beyond our reach. His actions destroyed whatever small part of me still hoped his confession had come from genuine remorse. Rachel spent that night at Robert's house. Susan offered to stay with me, but I declined. I needed to return home and face the silence by myself. When I entered the kitchen, the yellow roses Matthew had brought were still in Thomas's pitcher. Their petals had begun curling at the edges. I lifted the entire arrangement and carried it to the trash. Then I stopped. The pitcher belonged to my marriage, not to Matthew's manipulation. I removed the roses, threw them away, washed the glass, and returned it to the cabinet. That small act broke something open inside me. I sat on the kitchen floor and cried harder than I had since Thomas died. I cried for the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I cried for the teenager whose first suit Thomas had proudly purchased. I cried for the man who had stood beside me at his father's funeral and promised I would never be alone. That son existed in my memories, but the man who tried to take my savings and my house also existed. Both truths belonged to me, and I did not know how to hold them at the same time. The next morning should have been filled with preparations. Instead, I woke to several missed calls and messages from confused relatives. Some asked whether Rachel was ill. Others wanted to know why the ceremony had been canceled. I answered only that the marriage would not take place and that the family needed privacy. At 9, Angela called. We have located approximately $18,000 that had not yet been spent or permanently transferred, she said. Those funds are restricted while we verify ownership. What about the rest? The condominium deposit may be recoverable depending on the purchase agreement. We are also reviewing the transfers used for the wedding upgrades and debt settlement. She explained that the bank's internal team was investigating why an employee accepted the expanded authorization despite obvious inconsistencies. The account's long history of modest activity should have triggered direct contact with me through previously verified information, not a newly changed phone number. For now, I can't promise a final amount, Angela said, but there are serious questions about whether the bank followed its own protective procedures. It was the first hopeful news I had received. Still hope, did not erase grief. By noon, another kind of damage began. My sister-in-law, Carol, called and asked whether I had become confused about a gift I promised Matthew. "Matthew says you offered the money months ago," she said. "He says Rachel panicked and turned it into something ugly. I never offered him $86,000. He said you forget things sometimes. I am 68, Carol. I am not incompetent. I'm only repeating what he told us." Within hours, similar messages arrived from other relatives. Matthew had contacted them before I could explain anything. He portrayed himself as a devoted son who had followed his mother's instructions only to be betrayed when I changed my mind. He told one cousin that grief had affected my judgment. He told another that I had become increasingly suspicious since Thomas's death. He claimed Rachel used my confusion as an excuse to escape the wedding. Matthew was building a second defense. If he could not prove I had given him the money, he would convince people that I was too mentally unreliable to remember giving it. That afternoon, Susan received a formal letter from an attorney representing him. The letter stated that Matthew disputed my fraud claim and questioned whether I possessed the mental capacity to understand the financial arrangements I had made. It suggested that an independent evaluation might be necessary before my statements could be trusted. I read the letter twice. My son had taken my savings, forged my name, and tried to gain control over my house. Now he intended to take something even more precious, my right to speak for myself. Susan reached across her desk. "This is intimidation, Helen." I folded the letter and placed it back on the table. "Then we answer with evidence." For the first time since the wedding was canceled, my voice did not shake. Matthew believed calling me confused would make me retreat. Instead, he had given me one more reason to fight. By Monday morning, Matthew's version of events had spread through nearly every branch of our family. My phone rang constantly. Some relatives were genuinely concerned. Others had already decided that a mother should protect her son regardless of what he had done. A cousin from Cincinnati told me, "Money can be replaced, Helen. A family cannot." I wanted to ask whether she would feel the same if someone had emptied her retirement account, but I restrained myself. Carol was less subtle. "Matthew could lose his job," she said. "Do you want your only child to carry a fraud accusation for the rest of his life? Did he tell you he forged my signature? He said you signed the document and forgot." I did not forget. You have been emotional since Thomas died. Grief had become another weapon Matthew could use against me. Because I had mourned my husband, he wanted people to believe I could no longer trust my own mind. "I am ending this call," I said. "Helen, don't be stubborn." "I am not stubborn. I am protecting myself." After hanging up, I blocked several numbers for the afternoon and went to Susan's office. She had already prepared a response to Matthew's attorney. The letter was direct. It rejected every suggestion that I lacked mental capacity and demanded that Matthew preserve all computers' phones, email accounts, financial records, and communications related to my money. Susan attached a copy of my most recent medical evaluation. It showed no signs of cognitive impairment. My primary care physician confirmed that I managed my own medication appointments, household, and finances. We also included records from my hip surgery. The original authorization applied only during my recovery. Medical notes documented that I had returned to independent living months before the expanded document appeared at the bank. "This matters," Susan explained. "Matthew cannot claim he needed broad authority because you were still physically unable to manage your affairs." She added the original limited authorization, my dated notes account statements, and copies of the altered contact information. Every document told the same story. I had trusted my son during a temporary medical need. He transformed that trust into access I never granted. Rachel arrived carrying a flash drive and a large binder. Although the wedding had been canceled only days earlier, she looked calmer than she had at the rehearsal dinner. The sadness remained, but her uncertainty was gone. I exported every message with Matthew about the wedding and money, she said. She had preserved the complete conversations, not isolated screenshots. The dates and context showed his contradictions clearly. In one exchange, Matthew told Rachel that I voluntarily contributed a small amount. On the same day, he told me Robert had withdrawn support, and the wedding would collapse without my savings. In another message, he claimed he personally paid the venue. The venue's receipts proved Robert had paid it. Rachel also preserved messages in which Matthew described the condominium as company-provided housing. The purchase records showed it was a personal acquisition funded through Jason's company. "He can say one of us misunderstood him," Rachel said. "He cannot explain all of us misunderstanding him in different ways at the exact moments he needed." Susan nodded. "That pattern is important." The wedding vendors also responded to Susan's requests. The hotel confirmed that no payment from my account had been required to preserve the reservation. The caterer, florist, photographer, and band gave similar statements. The expensive upgrades had been ordered by Matthew independently, often after Rachel rejected them. One email was especially revealing. The hotel coordinator had written, "Mr. Wilson, please confirm that Ms. Parker has approved these additions." Matthew replied, "Rachel has given me full authority to surprise her. Please communicate only with me." Rachel had never given him such authority. Jason's position began to weaken as well. After the blocked transaction from Reed Premier Events, his attorney contacted Susan. Jason insisted he did not know the money had been taken without permission. He claimed Matthew told him I was making a legitimate family contribution and needed the funds transferred through a business account to organize wedding-related payments. Susan did not accept the explanation, but Jason agreed to preserve and provide the company records. Those records showed Reed Premier Events had almost no genuine business activity. It had been formed 4 months before the wedding. The $28,000 from my account was its largest deposit. Within 24 hours, nearly the entire amount was transferred toward Matthew's condominium. Jason had kept a small administrative fee. There were no event employees, vendor payments, or planning services. The company had functioned as a passageway for my money. Despite the evidence, the family pressure continued. One afternoon, 3 relatives arrived at my house without calling. They sat in my living room and urged me to withdraw the complaint. "Matthew made a mistake," Carol said. "But he is still your son. I know exactly who he is. He could face serious consequences. So could I. I could have lost my savings and my home." Another relative leaned forward. "Couldn't you call it an advance on his inheritance?" No. The word surprised them. For most of my life, I softened every refusal with an explanation or apology. That day, I did neither. "No," I repeated. "An inheritance is a gift made according to the owner's wishes." What Matthew did was take something while I was alive and then claim my age made my objections unreliable. Carol shook her head. "Thomas would not want the family torn apart. Thomas would not want our son stealing from me." The room became silent. I opened the folder Susan had prepared and showed them the legitimate authorization. The forged version, the changed contact information, and the transfer records. "I will not carry the shame for what Matthew chose to do," I said. "And I will not call financial abuse a private family matter just because the person responsible shares my last name." They left without apologizing, but they also stopped asking me to withdraw the complaint. The most important evidence arrived later that week. Angela's technical team had reviewed the bank's electronic records. The expanded authorization had been uploaded from a device connected to Matthew's online profile. The upload occurred more than 5 months after my doctor documented that I had fully recovered from surgery. The file's internal data identified the software used to create it and the user account under which it had been saved. That account carried Matthew's name. Through the formal legal process, a forensic specialist examined the preserved copy of the file and compared it with records from Matthew's computer. The document had been assembled using sections copied from a general financial power of attorney template. My scanned signature had been taken from the limited authorization and placed onto the new final page. Even the witness information had been typed into the file afterward. Susan read the report aloud in her office. The document was created on Matthew Wilson's computer at 11:43 p.m. on November 14th. I remembered that date. Matthew had eaten dinner at my house that evening. He brought soup, asked about my recovery, and offered to take the blue folder home so he could make cleaner copies for the bank. I had thanked him. The memory hurt more than the report. While I believed my son was helping protect me, he was using my signature to build authority over everything Thomas and I had saved. Susan closed the file. This directly contradicts his claim that you signed the document during your recovery. For weeks, Matthew had said I was forgetful. He had encouraged relatives to doubt me and threatened to make strangers question my competence. But computers did not feel guilt fear or family loyalty. The electronic record did not forget. And it showed that the false document had been created by Matthew long after I no longer needed his help. Once the forensic report was completed, Matthew's defense began to collapse. His attorney could no longer argue that I had signed the expanded authorization and forgotten. The file had been created on Matthew's computer months after my recovery, using a scanned copy of my signature. Bank records showed the security alerts had been redirected to the prepaid phone hidden in my guest room. There was no innocent explanation that could connect all those facts. Susan received a call from Matthew's attorney the following morning. They want to discuss a resolution, she told me. What kind of resolution? One that requires Matthew to admit what he did, return the money, and accept legal consequences without forcing you through a prolonged court fight. The decision was not simple. Part of me wanted a judge to state publicly that I had told the truth. I wanted every relative who doubted me to hear the evidence. I wanted Matthew to understand that being my son did not place him above the law. But a long trial could consume years. It would require repeated testimony about Thomas, my surgery, my finances, and every private wound Matthew had used against me. I did not want the rest of my life to become a courtroom waiting room. I will consider an agreement, I said, but only if it restores what can be restored, and does not call this a misunderstanding. Susan nodded. That will be non-negotiable. The first source of recovery was the condominium. Matthew had not completed the purchase, but the sales company had already received the $28,000 deposit. Because the funds were disputed and the transaction had been flagged before closing, the company agreed to terminate the agreement and return most of the deposit. Administrative penalties reduced the amount, but more than $24,000 came back. Jason was required to return the fee he had kept through Reed Premier Events. He also surrendered the remaining funds in the company account and agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. He sent me a written apology. Jason claimed he believed Matthew had permission to use the money, yet he admitted that routing a personal condominium deposit through a newly created event company was dishonest, even if he had avoided asking where the money came from. I did not respond. His apology could not erase the fact that he helped Matthew disguise the transaction. But I was relieved that his cooperation made recovery possible. The $31,000 spent on wedding upgrades was more complicated. Some vendors had already ordered flowers, alcohol decorations, and equipment. Other services had not yet been delivered because the wedding was canceled in time. Robert negotiated refunds wherever possible. Several vendors returned deposits after learning that the payments were connected to a fraud investigation. Not every dollar was recovered, but the losses became smaller. The $27,000 paid to settle Matthew's failed business debt had already reached the leasing company. That company had accepted the payment in good faith and was not required to return it. Matthew would have to repay that portion himself. Susan reviewed his asset salary retirement account, car lease, and remaining investments. The expensive lifestyle Matthew displayed had been built on very little actual security. He did not own the luxury car he drove. He had minimal savings and several personal debts. Still, he had income. The proposed agreement required automatic monthly restitution payments. A percentage of future bonuses, tax refunds, and eligible asset sales would also go toward the balance. His credit would be damaged, his spending would be monitored under the agreement, and failure to make payments could trigger harsher legal action. The bank conducted its own internal review. Angela confirmed that the branch employee had ignored several warning signs. The expanded authorization did not match the original document. The contact information had been changed shortly before the transfers. My account had never shown transactions of that size, yet no one contacted me through a previously verified number. The bank accepted partial responsibility. After subtracting the funds already recovered, it agreed to restore the remaining disputed amount to my account while pursuing its own claims against the responsible parties. The day I saw the corrected balance, I did not celebrate. I sat at the kitchen table and cried. Thomas and I had built that account one paycheck at a time. Seeing the money return felt like recovering a piece of our shared life that I believed was gone forever. But the numbers did not restore my trust in Matthew. They did not give Rachel back the future she thought she was building. They did not erase the forged signature or the moment my son called me confused because I refused to surrender. Matthew's agreement also carried formal consequences for the fraud. Because he admitted his actions, cooperated with restitution, and had no prior criminal record, he avoided the harshest possible outcome. Some relatives called that mercy. I called it accountability, with a door still open. He lost the condominium, the wedding, his access to my finances, and the image of success he had spent so much money constructing. He was required to continue counseling and fulfill every repayment obligation. Most importantly, the final written agreement did not describe the money as a gift. It stated clearly that the transfers were unauthorized. Before signing, Matthew made one last request through his attorney. He wanted me to tell the family that the dispute had been resolved and that everyone had misunderstood his intentions. "No," I said. Susan looked at me to make sure I understood the possible consequences. "He may refuse the agreement. Then he can explain the forged document in court." Matthew signed 2 days later. Afterward, he asked to meet me privately before everything became final. Susan advised me to choose a public place and keep the conversation brief. We met at a quiet park near the river on a cold Wednesday afternoon. Matthew looked different. His expensive suit was gone. He wore an ordinary jacket and appeared as though he had not slept properly in weeks. For several moments, we sat on opposite ends of a bench. "I'm sorry," he finally said. I waited. I didn't plan for it to become this big. "You created a false authorization. I thought I could replace the money before you truly needed it. You changed my bank alerts. I was afraid you would panic before I fixed everything. You tried to gain authority over my house." He looked down at his hands. I needed options. I felt no satisfaction in seeing him defeated. He was still my child, and that made the truth more painful, not less. "Why didn't you ask me for help? Because you might have said no." "That was my right. I know that now." "No, you knew it then. That is why you forged my signature." He did not argue. The river moved slowly behind us. For the first time in weeks, Matthew stopped presenting excuses and allowed silence to expose him. Then he said something I would never forget. "At first, I really planned to pay everything back. But after the first transfer, you didn't report me. You listened when I said the wedding would be ruined." He swallowed. "I realized you were more afraid of losing me than I was of hurting you." The honesty struck deeper than another lie. "You thought I would never fight back." Yes, there it was. Matthew had not continued because he believed the money belonged to him. He continued because he believed my love made me weak. I stood from the bench. My love for you was never weakness. My mistake was believing love required silence. He looked up at me. Can you forgive me? Not today. I walked away without turning back. Matthew had lost the life he built with my money, but I had not destroyed him. I had simply stopped protecting him from the price of his own choices. For the first time since Thomas died, I understood that protecting myself was not a betrayal of my family. It was the beginning of justice. 6 months after the canceled wedding, my life no longer revolved around bank investigations, legal letters, or whispered family conversations. The locks on my house had been changed. My accounts required direct verification from me for any significant transaction. Susan remained my attorney, but she was no longer receiving emergency calls every week. Most of the money had been restored, and Matthew's monthly restitution payments arrived automatically. The numbers were becoming stable again. My heart was taking longer. For the first several weeks after our meeting by the river, Matthew did not contact me. He attended counseling, complied with the agreement, and communicated only through Susan when necessary. I was grateful for the silence, though I sometimes hated myself for enjoying it. Without his constant phone calls and manufactured emergencies, I began to recognize how much of my life had been organized around keeping him comfortable. I had confused being needed with being loved. The difference became impossible to ignore. I joined a financial safety group at the community center after Angela invited me to speak privately with its coordinator. The group helped older adults recognize exploitation by relatives, caregivers, and trusted advisors. At my first meeting, I sat in the back and said nothing. A retired teacher described how her nephew had borrowed her credit card for groceries and accumulated $12,000 in debt. A widower admitted that his daughter controlled his pension and gave him a weekly allowance from his own money. Their stories were different from mine, but the shame sounded the same. Each person had trusted someone they loved. Each had initially remained silent because exposing the truth felt like exposing a personal failure. When it was finally my turn, I said, "My son stole $86,000 and tried to make me believe protecting myself would destroy our family." No one looked shocked. No one blamed me. A woman across the circle reached for my hand. "You did not destroy the family," she said. "You exposed what was already hurting it." I carried those words home. Eventually, I began volunteering with the group. I helped people organize documents, create lists of trusted contacts, and write questions to bring to their banks or attorneys. I never offered legal advice. I simply sat beside frightened people while they reclaimed control of their own lives. It gave purpose to something I had once considered only humiliating. Rachel also began rebuilding. She moved into a smaller apartment near her office and returned every wedding gift that could be returned. Robert offered to cover the losses, but she refused. She wanted the canceled ceremony to become part of her past, not a debt tying her to it. She and I stayed in contact. At first, our conversations focused on the investigation. Later, we spoke about books, recipes, work, and grief. We had both lost a future involving Matthew, though in very different ways. One Saturday, she helped me plant lavender along the back fence. "I used to imagine bringing my children here," she said quietly. I pressed soil around a small plant. "I imagined that too." "Do you ever wish you had let the wedding happen and dealt with everything afterward?" I considered the question honestly. "No. A beautiful ceremony cannot make a dishonest marriage safe." Rachel nodded. "I know. Sometimes I just miss the person I believed he was." "So do I." That was one of the hardest truths to accept. We were not only grieving Matthew's actions, we were grieving the versions of him we had loved. Robert visited occasionally as well. He never treated me as responsible for what happened to his daughter. Instead, he thanked me for helping Rachel discover the truth before the marriage. He had established a small fund in his late wife's name to support local programs addressing financial abuse. When he asked whether our community group could use assistance, I connected him with the coordinator. Something decent grew from the wreckage, though none of us would have chosen the cost. My relationships with relatives changed too. Some apologized. Carol arrived one afternoon carrying a pie and an expression so uncomfortable that I almost felt sorry for her. I should not have repeated what Matthew said, she admitted. I knew you well enough to ask questions before assuming you were confused. Yes, you did? She looked surprised that I did not immediately excuse her. I was trying to keep the family together. So was I for years. That was how Matthew knew silence would protect him. Carol lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, I accept your apology, but trust will take time. That sentence would once have felt cruel to me. Now it felt honest. Other relatives never apologized. They simply stopped calling, perhaps embarrassed by their accusations, or still convinced that a mother should absorb any injury caused by her child. I let them go. Loneliness was no longer the weapon it had once been. A quiet house could be peaceful when the silence belonged to me. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, I visited the cemetery alone. I brought fresh white roses and sat beside his grave. I almost lost everything we built, I told him. Not only the money. I nearly lost myself trying to hold on to Matthew. Wind moved through the trees above me. I thought about the promise Thomas had made that what remained should protect my life. For months, I had interpreted that promise only in financial terms. Now I understood it differently. Thomas had wanted me to live with security, dignity, and choice. He would never have asked me to surrender those things to prove I loved our son. Before leaving, I placed my hand against the cool stone. I finally chose to protect the life you wanted me to keep living. A letter from Matthew arrived 3 weeks later. Susan had reviewed it first at my request. It contained no demand, accusation, or request for money. He wrote that counseling had forced him to examine how envy and entitlement had shaped his decisions. He admitted that he had spent years comparing himself with wealthier people and resenting anyone who reminded him of what he lacked. He also admitted that after Thomas died, he recognized how dependent I had become on his help. Instead of protecting that trust, he began measuring how much control it gave him. I stopped reading and placed the letter on the table. That admission hurt, but it did not surprise me anymore. Matthew wrote that he did not expect forgiveness. He promised to continue making restitution and said he would not contact me again unless I invited him. At the end, he wrote, I used your fear of being alone because I believed you would always choose me over yourself. I understand now that asking you to make that choice was not love. I folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. For 2 days, I debated whether to answer. Finally, I wrote 3 sentences. I received your letter. I hope you continue taking responsibility without expecting forgiveness as a reward. If we ever rebuild a relationship, it will happen slowly, honestly, and within boundaries I choose. I mailed it before I could soften the words. Another 6 months passed. Matthew continued making every required payment. He found a less prestigious job after losing his former position. From what Susan learned, he sold the luxury car lease, moved into an ordinary apartment, and completed additional community service requirements connected to the agreement. He did not ask me to rescue him. On my 70th birthday, a card arrived. There was no dramatic message inside. Happy birthday, Mom. I am still doing the work. I hope you are well. I placed the card beside Thomas's photograph. Then I went outside, where Rachel, Susan, Angela, Robert, several neighbors and friends from the community group had gathered in my garden. For years, I had believed Matthew was the only person standing between me and complete loneliness. Yet my table was full. People laughed beneath strings of white lights. Lavender moved in the evening breeze. The pitcher Matthew had once filled with manipulative yellow roses now held flowers I had cut from my own garden. Rachel carried out a cake and placed it before me. "Make a wish," she said. I looked around at the people who had believed me, protected me, challenged me, and allowed me to become stronger, without demanding that I pretend the pain had never happened. I did not wish for the past to return. I did not wish for Matthew to become the little boy I remembered, or the honest man I once believed he was. I wished only for the courage to keep accepting the truth whatever it required. Then I blew out the candles. My son had taken my money because he believed my love would keep me silent. He had been wrong. But the greatest victory was not recovering the $86,000 or stopping him from reaching my house. It was learning that my life still belonged to me and that I never again had to surrender it to prove I was a good mother. 2 years after the wedding that never happened, I received a telephone call from Matthew. He had respected the boundary in my letter. Apart from birthday cards and formal updates through Susan, he had not contacted me directly. When his name appeared on my screen, I watched it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello, Mom." His voice sounded older, stripped of the confidence he once used to control every conversation. "Is something wrong?" "No. I wanted to ask if you would meet me. If the answer is no, I'll understand." I did not agree immediately. "What do you want to discuss?" "Nothing financial. I'm not asking you for help. I just want to speak honestly." The old part of me wanted to say yes before he could change his mind. That part still remembered the child frightened by thunderstorms and the young man standing beside Thomas at graduation. But love no longer made my decisions alone. "I'll think about it." "Thank you." After the call, I contacted Susan. She reminded me that Matthew had completed every restitution payment on schedule. The remaining balance was smaller, and there had been no attempt to avoid his obligations. Counseling reports submitted through the agreement showed consistent participation. He had also begun speaking in a court-approved financial abuse program, describing how entitlement could grow inside families where trust replaced oversight. None of that guaranteed he had changed, but it showed that he was doing more than waiting for my anger to fade. I agreed to meet him at the same Riverside Park where he had once admitted that he considered my fear stronger than my willingness to fight. This time, Matthew arrived before me. He wore a simple blue shirt and drove an older sedan. There was no expensive watch-tailored suit or polished performance. When he saw me, he stood but did not try to embrace me. "You look well," he said. "I am well." We sat on the bench. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Matthew handed me a folder. My body tensed automatically. "It isn't something for you to sign," he said quickly. "It's the final payment schedule. I wanted you to see that I increased the monthly amount. I did not open it. Susan can review it." "Of course." He placed the folder between us. "I asked to meet because I owe you an apology that doesn't contain an explanation." I waited. He took a slow breath. "I stole your money. I forged your signature. I redirected your bank alerts, lied to Rachel, and tried to gain access to your house. When you challenged me, I attacked your age and memory because I wanted other people to distrust you." There was no mention of pressure wedding expenses, Robert's wealth, or his failed business. Only facts. "I knew what I was doing was wrong," he continued. "I kept doing it because I believed I could manage the consequences. I treated your love like protection from accountability." I looked toward the river. For 2 years, I had imagined what a complete apology might sound like. Hearing it did not erase the past. It did, however, remove the burden of arguing with another excuse. "Why now?" I asked. "My counselor asked me whether I wanted forgiveness, or whether I wanted to become someone capable of receiving it. I realized I had spent most of my life wanting rewards before doing the work. He looked down at his hands. I don't expect our old relationship back. That relationship wasn't healthy even before I stole from you. You needed me too much, and I liked being needed because it made me feel important. The honesty stung. I did rely on you after your father died. You trusted your son. That wasn't permission for me to exploit you. For the first time, he said exactly what I had needed to understand. My trust had not caused his betrayal. His choices had. Rachel deserved an apology too, I said. I wrote to her a year ago. I told her she didn't need to answer. Did she? No. There was sadness in his voice, but no accusation. She has a right to move on without me. Rachel had moved on. She had accepted a position in another city and recently begun dating a quiet history professor. She still called me every Sunday. I did not tell Matthew those details. They belonged to her. Do you forgive me? He asked. I studied his face. Forgiveness is not a door that suddenly opens and returns us to the room we left. He nodded. I understand. I no longer wake up angry every day. I don't want revenge. I want you to live honestly and never do this to another person. But trust requires evidence over time. An apology is the beginning, not the evidence. I know. I looked at the son I loved and the man who had harmed me. For the first time, I did not feel forced to choose between those truths. I'm willing to have lunch with you once a month, I said, in public for now. No financial discussions. No access to my accounts, documents, passwords, or house keys. Matthew's eyes filled with tears. That's more than I expected. If you pressure me for more, the meetings stop. I won't. I hope you mean that. I do. We walked separately to our cars. There was no dramatic embrace and no promise that everything would become what it once was. That was precisely why the meeting felt real. Over the next year, Matthew and I met for lunch 11 times. He canceled once because of work and notified me 2 days in advance. He never asked for money. He never complained about the restitution agreement or suggested that I had punished him too severely. Sometimes our conversations were awkward. Sometimes we spoke about Thomas and cried. On better afternoons, Matthew made me laugh, and I caught a glimpse of the son I remembered. But I no longer mistook a pleasant afternoon for complete restoration. Trust returned in grains, not waves. When the final restitution payment arrived, Matthew sent no request for celebration. He mailed confirmation to Susan and wrote me a short note. The debt is paid, but I know repayment does not erase what I did. I will continue honoring your boundaries. I placed the note in my records. Then I closed the file that had occupied nearly 3 years of my life. The money Thomas and I saved was secure. My house remained mine. My legal documents now named an independent fiduciary rather than a relative. Rachel and Susan were emergency contacts, but neither could act alone. I had learned that protection was not an insult to love. Healthy trust could survive verification. Only manipulation demanded blind faith. At 72, I decided to use a portion of my restored savings for something Thomas and I had always postponed. I traveled to Maine, where we had once dreamed of seeing the autumn coastline. Rachel joined me for the first 4 days. After she returned to work, I remained another week alone. One morning, I stood beside a lighthouse while waves struck the dark rocks below. The wind was cold, and the ocean stretched beyond everything I could see. For decades, I had defined myself through relationships: Thomas's wife, Matthew's mother, Rachel's almost mother-in-law. Those identities mattered. but they were not the boundaries of my existence. I was Helen Wilson. I had survived grief, betrayal, public doubt, and the terrible realization that someone I loved believed my compassion made me easy to control. I had also learned to ask questions, demand records, say no without apologizing, and let consequences belong to the person who created them. Before leaving Maine, I bought a small wooden box and placed a photograph from the trip inside it. On the back, I wrote, "Love should never require you to disappear." Years earlier, Matthew had told me I could lose him, Rachel, and my future grandchildren if I refused to sign his document. He believed the fear of being alone would force my hand. Instead, refusing him led me back to myself. My future was not the wedding he planned, the inheritance he expected, or the silence he demanded. It was the garden I planted, the friends gathered around my table, the people I helped at the community center, and the quiet mornings that belonged entirely to me. I still loved my son, but I finally loved myself enough to stop confusing sacrifice with surrender. And that was the inheritance I chose to leave behind. Not merely money or a house, but the truth that no one family or stranger has the right to steal your dignity and call it love.